Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Jordan Peterson. Jordan, great to have you back on the programme. A lot has happened since you were last on just a few weeks ago. I want to start by saying that I'm wrestling with a lot of moral quandaries about this war. And I'm hoping that through our conversation today, we might get to at least have some clarity about the moral quandaries and see if we can work out what we should be thinking about this, because I think it's very complicated. And it's got to be nuanced, this conversation. Do you feel any moral quandaries about it?
Well, I don't think you can have a war without moral quandary. I mean, a war is the consequence of an unsolvable moral quandary. And so it's not surprising that the conversation surrounding the war is full of moral quandaries, because if it was straightforward and simple, and if there was an easy path forward, then there wouldn't be a war. And so, I mean, I can tell you what I think is going on to the degree that you can reduce it to something quickly explicable. You know, I think Iran is desperate because of the tenuous hold on power that the mullahs now have in Iran, given their own citizens' rebellion. I think they see the Abraham Accords, which were the most significant step forward towards peace in the Middle East for like 75 years. They see the Abraham Accords as an existential threat. This is a last-ditch attempt by the Iranian mullahs to use the Islam against Jews story to prop up their own dismal reign. And so they rattled the chain of their Hamas puppets and said, provoke, and they did, and their hope is that the Israeli response will be so overwhelming that the Arab world turns against them, and maybe even the people who might be inclined to be swayed by a victim narrative in the West, and that the Abraham Accords will fall apart, and that'll be the end of that. And that could happen, and I'm hoping it won't, because I think the Abraham Accords were, and it's irritating to me, for whatever utility that is that I think I know, insofar as you can know such things, that Saudi Arabia would have signed the Abraham Accords 2 years ago if Biden would have moved a little bit more forthrightly on it. And I think the reason that he didn't and the Democrats didn't was because they didn't want to give Trump any credit for anything that he had attained in his administration. And I think all of that is appalling. And I see this story of Muslim against Jew being put forward in this propagandistic manner, and I think, well, the Muslim world has to make a choice too, because it doesn't look to me like their proper champions is the government in Iran, and it's not like the Saudis don't have their flaws, and perhaps the rest of the Arab governmental structures, but the Islam world should move in the direction of the Abraham Accords. That would be great for everyone. We could have a real peace. We could have something approximating a union of the Abrahamic people, and I think the accord was named extraordinarily well. Or we could have what we've had for the last 75 years with the Palestinians as perpetual cannon fodder, at the beck and call of those for whom having them be cannon fodder is useful. And so, yeah, well, there's just moral quandaries everywhere there. It's a minefield, but that's what I think is the fundamental reality of the current situation. It's a propaganda war, and there's a lot at stake.
On October the 7th, Hamas obviously committed a terror attack of appalling magnitude. Where were you when you first heard about it, and what was your instant feeling about it?
Well, my instant feeling was to be sickened by it, and it hasn't been that long since I was in Jerusalem, and so it was a little closer to me than it might have otherwise been. I'm also more sensitive to any signs of anti-Semitic catastrophe from studying the Holocaust for the length of time that I did, and I've always regarded Jews as the canary in the coal mine, and I think the reason that the Jews are the canary in the coal mine is because they're a successful minority. And if a culture can tolerate a successful minority, it's pretty damn robust, and it's not very resentful. And as soon as a culture starts to get resentful, the Jews make an easy target. because they're a minority, and so that's an easy target to begin with, but then they're the minority that has the temerity to be successful. And that really brings the resentful out of the rat holes. And I've seen a rise in anti-Semitism online over the last 3 years. It's just stunning to behold, on the right and on the left, jointly. And then, well, so I was sickened by it, but then I was also immediately suspicious of Iran's role. And I mean, that doesn't require any particular perspicacity on my part. I think it's quite obvious, but that also opens up the rat's nest of the maneuvering, the political maneuvering around the Abraham Accords, because, you know, I was very ill when the Abraham Accords were signed, and I couldn't or hadn't paid much attention. And when I sort of recovered my ability to see again, I saw that this remarkable peace process had taken place, and I could not understand for the life of me why it wasn't trumpeted on the front page of every newspaper across the world. And I also think that Trump's team should have got a Nobel Peace Prize for it. I cannot see how you could possibly make a counter-argument to that, for all of Trump's flaws and for his administration's flaws. This was a major accomplishment. And yet, and I know the Saudis were behind it. You know, they didn't sign it, but it wouldn't have gone forward without their nod and wink. And I believe, that if Biden would have taken the opportunity and been a bit magnanimous in his response to Trump, which he could have been, instead of thinking of him as Satan himself, that he could have enticed the Saudis into a peace accord. And we wouldn't be in this damn situation now. And now we're playing it out the hard way, you know, because the Iranians could win the propaganda war, and they've got, God only knows how many agents they have in the West, you know, promoting the kind of social upheaval that we've seen on the streets in the last few weeks. And so the narrative could go either way. But I'm rooting hard for the Abraham Accords signees, and I hope they have the courage of their convictions, and I hope they can see that their way forward is the most appropriate way forward for the good of the Muslim world. Or what, are we going to stay in some 14th century conflict between the fundamentalist Muslim world and the Jews? Jesus, that sounds, you know, we've had enough of that, haven't we? You'd think.